form our hearts and that we would sing in tune with your grace. Father, hear our prayer. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. So this afternoon, or this morning, we are continuing on in our 1 Samuel series. For those of you who may be joining us as guests today, what we've been doing is we've been looking at the introduction of David onto the scene, into the story of redemption, the history of Israel. David would be the father of the eventual forefather of Jesus Christ. And so this is a story about how God brings him into the history of redemption. And we've seen his introductions. We've been introduced to him and his anointing and how he comes into the court of Saul to play as a musician. We've seen him introduced to Israel in his battle with Goliath. And we've been looking now at responses to David, to the Messiah. And last time we looked at Jonathan's response. And today what we're going to do is we're going to look at Saul's response. And so what I'd like to do with you right now is read from 1 Samuel. And we're going to read 1 Samuel 18. And 1 Samuel 18 will be the text for the message this morning as well. So let's read. This is God's word. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, that's he is David, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house, while David was playing the lyre as he did day by day. And Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Mahalathite for a wife. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." And Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, 'Behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law.'" And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David. And David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation?" And the servants of Saul told him, "Thus and so did David speak." Then Saul said, "Thus shall you say to David, 'The king desires no bride price, except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies.'" Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. This is God's word. In case you haven't noticed, I do have a cold, so I apologize in advance for the coughing. And this is hot water for my throat. So, brothers and sisters, loved in Christ, as we look at 1 Samuel 18, we need to understand that Saul's response to David is the response of the rejected Messiah. Messiah means anointed. Saul was a Messiah. David's anointed. He's also a Messiah. But Saul is the rejected Messiah. And this is his response to the new Messiah, God's choice. It's his response to God and to God's will. Saul lives with the reality. If you have your Bibles, you can turn back and see this. Lives with the reality of what was said to him in 1 Samuel 15, verses 23 and also verse 28. There, Samuel comes to Saul and tells him, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, the Lord, has also rejected you from being king. It's verse 23. And then also verse 28, it says, the kingdom is torn from you and it's given to your neighbor who is better than you. So Saul is a king whose kingdom and rule face its biggest threat in the one who made him king, the Lord himself. That's something to think about when you think about Saul's response. The biggest threat to Saul's kingdom is the Lord. And what you have here in 1 Samuel 18 is we're being shown how Saul will respond to the Lord as he responds to David. While Jonathan, we looked at that last time, while Jonathan embraces the rule of God and the will of God for his kingdom, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Israel, as he submits to that, embraces that in God's choice of David, and we even see him abdicating the throne, his rights to the throne. He loves David, the man who would take his throne. Well, Jonathan does all of that. What we're going to see this morning is that Saul fights it with every fiber of his being. He clings to the throne. Just by way of introduction, if you look at the first 5 verses, we're not going to focus too much on those verses, but they kind of set up the rest. They're kind of an overview. But verses 1 through 5 are largely about Jonathan. But in verse 2, we read this: "And Saul took him," that's David, "that day, and would not let him return to his father's house." What you see is that David identified in relationship to his father as a son, is taken by the king. What's fascinating is the author of 1 Samuel is reminding us of what Samuel said in 1 Samuel 8, 10 to 18. There, that's when Israel wants a king like all the other nations have, and then Samuel warns them. This is before we're introduced to Saul. This is what your king will do. He will take your sons, and he will make them commanders of thousands. Both those things happen in 1 Samuel 18, right? David is taken by Saul. Later on, he'll be made a commander of 1,000. But the point is this, is that Saul continues to be the king that Samuel said he would be. He settles into that, and he is going to cling to that. What you have in verse 5 is sort of an overview of David's career, in Saul's service. And it's sort of an overview, I suppose you could say, of all of chapter 18. Sort of an overview of, he does well, he's set over the men of war, everybody agrees, this is a great decision, it all went well. But what you have starting in verse 6, and it goes to verse 29, is you have little stories within that overview that tell you about how Saul is actually responding to David. And what you have is these events, we're not just told what happened, we're given a window into the heart and the mind of Saul as he does this. And what we're going to see this morning is that it's a spiraling downward for Saul. It's a spiraling downward that's part of Saul's personal story. It's also something about a specific moment in the history of redemption, what God's doing with his people, about what God's doing, bringing about Jesus Christ into the world. It's also about how evil in the world responds to God and to the people of God in response to the advancing kingdom of God. And it's also about how sin works in our hearts. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to work through the passage. We're going to look at really 4 sort of events, and we're going to draw out 3 things. We'll do it all at the same time. We're not going to break the text up and kind of plug in the text to each part, but these are 3 things that you can kind of see going on, and so just keep them in mind as we go through the passage. What you have in the first place is a personal story of a response of rebellion to God. It's Saul's story. The second thing is that we're going to see the inevitability of God's plan of redemption. That's one thing you're going to see. God has a plan, and the futility of Saul's response to God's plan is just on display. So that's the second thing that's going on. And then also what we're going to look at is just this sort of clash of kingdoms that happens inside our hearts. And how this passage, for it just simply being a story of one person's rebellion, can also speak to us about the battle that goes on inside us. So personal response of Saul, the inevitability of God's plan of redemption, and then just the clash of kingdoms in our heart. So let's still work through the narrative. So we begin verse 6. What you have in verse 6 is the women singing over the victory of David, David's victory over Goliath. And it seems like a small thing. This song is sung. They're celebrating this wondrous victory. And interestingly, in the song, they're greeting, it says they're greeting King Saul. And they sing the song, and David is connected to Saul. David's actions are connected to Saul's, but the problem for Saul is that the order is reversed. It should have been David killed his thousands and Saul his 10,000s. And you can say this was Saul being envious of David, but you got to understand there's something more going on here, because if you in the original, like in the Hebrew, like when it says in verse 8, the saying displeased him. Literally what it says is, and the thing was evil to Saul. It was wrong. David had the higher praise. And Saul was supposed to get that. That was the way it was supposed to work. He was the king. This was his kingdom. The king gets that praise. And it's wrong that they're giving it to David because it belongs to me. Saul has a kingdom, his own kingdom. And that kingdom matters more than anything else. And anything that violates that kingdom, that the rights of him as king, is wrong. There's an envy in that, sure. But it's an envy rooted in a just firmly held sense of what is right and wrong in the way things should be. It seems like a small thing, and an annoyance at a song where it didn't work out. But we all have this, and it starts here. We have a kingdom, a way we want things to be. And when someone intrudes on that, we get outraged. It can be really small stuff. She didn't say hi to me this morning. I hate her. I didn't get to do what I wanted to do today. We're doing this, and I wanted to do this. You have little things that go on. You have your kingdom of self. And it becomes more important than anything else, and you will have a sense of injustice, a righteous anger against those who would violate that. And that's what Saul has here. It's just a little thing, a song, an annoyance, a thought. But it will grow and it will dominate him. It says there he began to keep his eye on David. What more could David have but the kingdom? Started already 17 verse 55, right? Whose son are you? Are you from Judah? Right? The way he acted in the battle with Goliath, the fact that the Lord was with him, and now these women singing like he's already king. Now, the second thing that happens is Saul's attempted murder of David when the evil spirit or harmful spirit was on him. And it's interesting, the song of the women is the day of, the thing with the spear and the evil spirit is the next day. So this is happening pretty quick. So a harmful or evil spirit from God rushes upon Saul. And the sense that we get in the text is that he is raging or raving in his home. Now, the Hebrew word used here for raving is actually the same word that's used for prophesying. So if you have I think the NIV translates it as, while Saul was prophesying in his house. But the context determines whether or not it's prophecy or raving. And this context is that he's raging. He's raving. The evil spirit's upon him and he's raging. David begins to play, as he has been doing since chapter 16, plays music, the harp or the lyre, and it's supposed to calm him. But instead, what it does is it pushes Saul. And he's like, I'm going to kill him. And he just takes his spear and he just lashes out. He intentionally tries to kill David. Now, we've talked about this when we looked at the second half of 1 Samuel 16, when David comes into the court of Saul, and about how the evil spirit, how God uses even evil and evil spirits to accomplish his goal of redemption. That God is so sovereign, so in control, that even evil serves him. That it is not, that evil is not outside of his control. That they try their worst. I quoted that it's the greatest contradiction that God tolerates in his creation. Evil, sin against him. But even that is used by him. It is powerless against him. And that's what we have here in 1 Samuel 16. And it's fascinating when you break it down. Question. What did Saul do under the influence of the evil spirit that he would not do throughout the rest of his life when not under the direct influence of the evil spirit? Absolutely nothing. You get that? This evil spirit comes upon him. He's raging. He's raving. And what he does in this outlash, this outburst, is the same thing that he will do going forward. The evil spirit simply makes Saul more of what he already is. Think that through. The evil spirit makes him more of what he already is. Think about it for your own life. So often you'll blame your actions, or you're being mad on some situation, or something that you were going through, or lack of sleep, or whatever you want to come up with. Oh, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. I'm not like that. It was just a bad moment. I had too much to drink. I was under a lot of stress. I was under a lot of pressure. So-and-so did this, and it just got to me, and I just did that. But that's not what But the truth is this, isn't it? You didn't like what you did because it was an outburst. It was out of control. But the truth is those actions are in some way or form a reflection of what's in our hearts already. Excuse me. What you have is something is inside your heart, and the situation simply is the opportunity for it to come out. You think about the last time you got mad and you said, "Oh, that wasn't me." But dig a little deeper. Was it actually you? What you didn't like is that you went a little too far. You punched somebody. You yelled at your kids or your wife or your husband. You had a hissy fit or a temper tantrum. You succumb to lust, or to hurting somebody, or taking something that you shouldn't have taken. And it was something that lives there. And you don't like the extreme manifestation of that sin. And you want to control those outbursts, but you're not that concerned about the fundamental problem in your heart. That you're finding the most important thing to you, your gospel, your kingdom is something that's so important to you. And it's not love for God and not love for Jesus, not love for your neighbor. You just want to manage the outcomes. I hate this person. My desired response, the response I'm okay with, is that I have that anger on kind of like a low boil, slow burn, just kind of, I'm casual, too cool for school, just kind of, I'm going to be aloof. I'm going to be indifferent. I'm going to act like it doesn't get to me. I'm just going to ignore. I'm going to marginalize. I'm going to eliminate distance. I'm going to do all that stuff. Nobody will know that I can't stand that person. But then something happens, and what's inside comes out. And you're like, oh, I got to work on that. Why am I so stupid? I got to keep that lid on that. What the evil spirit does in Saul is it reveals his heart. Same thing with Pharaoh in the Exodus. When God hardens Pharaoh's heart, he makes Pharaoh more of what he already is. Gives him over to it. That's the thing that you got to think about when you look at Saul. In Saul, you're not seeing someone who points to Jesus. You're somebody showing you. You see in Saul somebody who's showing you the way not to respond to Jesus Christ and to God's kingdom. And sometimes what God will do is He will allow us to experience something of the destination of the path that we've put ourselves on. You have this simmering hatred or anger towards somebody, and God will at times in His divine providence and His wisdom allow us to experience a foretaste of being given over to that. You look at Canons of Dort, chapter 5, I won't read it here, Articles 3 and 4. About those who are elect, those who are redeemed. Sometimes God will permit them to sin, to fall into deep sins. That'll happen to David. Fall into deep sin for a time. But then He'll draw them back. May your sin draw you to Christ and your need for a Messiah who will save you from your sin and from yourself. But with Saul, he is so far gone that doesn't happen. The outlash simply leads to a change in tactic. He begins to carry out what he wants, but in a more civilized way. So the third thing that happens is Saul's removing David from his presence and making him a commander of 1,000. What happens is it's almost a sense that Saul appears to realize that David's playing has an impact on him, on the presence of the evil spirit, precisely because David has the presence of the Spirit of God with him. Now, that fact does not become helpful to David. And the sense in the text is that he removes David from his presence. He's like, okay, the presence of David is a problem. Because he needs to be away from me. And so he removes him. And while it might be part of this, I'm trying to manage my hatred of David, let's just, I don't know, you do that with, you guys, just don't look at each other. You go on that side, you go on that side. That's how we're going to deal with this. You don't look at each other. Don't talk to each other. And so Saul's there's a bit of that. But what's fascinating, and the text tells us that, you get the sense of this as you work through the text, there's this likelihood that when he made him a commander of 1,000, it was also to expose David to danger. He'll do that continually in the next few verses here. But so he wants to create a distance between David and the court and David and himself, but he also wants to expose David to danger, and hopefully David will be eliminated. But the opposite happens. The Lord is with David, and the fact that he is the Lord's Messiah is confirmed even more. And even more than that, all Israel and Judah, were told, loved David. It was fascinating how many people love David. Like Saul, in chapter 16, verse 21, says Saul loved David. Jonathan loved David. All the people loved David. Michael loved David. But Saul, Saul tries to marginalize David, to expose him to ruin, and the opposite thing happens, and everybody loves him. And what says there in verse 15 is Saul sees this development, and he stands in awe that is an awe that has a sense of respect, he has a fear, but that fear has a sense of awe. Like he stands before David, and he has this fearful awe. God's choice of David is made even more clear, and he has this fearful awe, but he digs in. What started in him, just continuing to be the king as he always was. What was an annoying song and then an outburst is now expressed in scheming and intentionality. We also see here the futility of his response to God's plan. The inevitability. Nothing Saul can do can stop it. And this is going to be shown even more in the next move. The fourth thing is that Saul attempts to have David marry his daughters. This is it's actually a sad thing in the story of Merab and Michal. These two young women are drawn into this as like pawns. Part of it's a reflection of the culture of that time and how women were treated. But it's also a picture of Saul taking members of his own household and using them for his own kingdom. And for both of them, if you read through, they each have their own story. We're going to learn more about Michal. She's got a complicated, complex story. But Merab's got a sad story. And it all starts here. But what Saul is doing is simply a variation on the same theme. He is scheming. He's trying to find a way to increase David's profile so he'll be a target for the Philistines. He wants the Philistines to kill the guy. And the best way to do that is to have him part of the royal family. Now, what he does is he first offers his daughter Merab. Now, we're not sure, it's possibly connected to his killing of Goliath. That's the promise that is kind of the soldiers are kind of talking about. The king said, get his daughter and no taxes. And it appears that David declines the request. You can see there's a bit of tension in how you translate it. Is it because Saul changes his mind, or is it because David declines? The sense is that David declines. He says, no, I can't have this honor of being the king's son-in-law. It's just a genuine, I'm not worthy of the honor. And so what happens is that Saul then gives Merab to another man. And she marries him. But then what happens is Saul finds out that his younger daughter, Michal, is in love with David. And he sees an opportunity. And it's interesting, she'll be a snare to him. It's interesting, it's as though he sees an opportunity in Michal that she has somebody he can manipulate and control who will be close to David. And then also that he will then be a target of the Philistines. I'll get them to kill him for me. And so this time what Saul does is he puts a little more work into it as he schemes. He does a little bit of backroom negotiating and, leaking of, the king's wishes. It's like, you imagine the story, the king really wants you to be his son-in-law, And then, David says, hey, I don't have money for the dowry. I don't have anything to give. My father's family is poor. And then what Saul does is he gives this rather grotesque dowry. So in those cultures, if you had a daughter and she was going to get married, the guy who married her would have to give a lot of money to you as the father. There's a bride price. And so David doesn't have anything, and so Saul says, here's the bride price. But the bride price itself is an attempt to get David killed. It's kind of like if you got a guy that you can marry my daughter, I'd like you to jump off the sea and tower. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I want you to walk a high wire across Niagara Falls, and then you can have my wife. That's all I want. It's an attempt to get him killed. And again, you see the futility and the inevitability of David, but the futility of Saul's resistance and the inevitability of David, the Messiah. David goes out and says, 100, I'll kill 200. He kills 200 Philistines. And then it's grotesque. He brings their foreskins. That's what Saul asked for. And so he brings those to Saul, and Saul says, here's my daughter. Now, verse 28 and verse 29 are kind of a summary of everything. And here it's so explicit. It's been there throughout, but if you look at verse 28, but when Saul saw and knew that the Lord, Yahweh, was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. This is where everything's leading. This is where it's all headed in 1 Samuel 18. We talked about that in 1 Samuel 16:21. Where, Saul loved him. Everybody loved David. But Saul becomes more and more aware of who David is, which means he becomes more and more aware of God's plan for Israel and for his kingdom. And he hates him. He goes from being angry to fearful awe to even more fear. Think that through. He stands before David and he's like, not only are you the one that Samuel talked about, who will take my throne, but the Lord is with you, and you are incredible. You are magnificent, and I hate you. Saul's response is defiance and opposition. And when we look at Saul, we need to see the response of the fallen world to Jesus Christ. Left to ourselves, that is our response to God. Think that through. At the end of time, when Jesus Christ returns, when the glory of God is revealed in all its beauty, its magnificence, when Jesus takes the throne and puts all things to rights, how will the world respond? You are magnificent. You are incredible. You are all-powerful. And I hate you. I will bow, but I hate you. God is an enemy. It's only by the grace of God that any of us will not view him as an enemy. It's a warning that comes to you as you read this passage. It's a warning the author of 1 Samuel is giving to Israel. If you're here today and you're indifferent as to whether or not God exists, if you're here today and you think he exists, but you're living like he doesn't, he's Savior, but he's not my Lord. What he says about, what it looks like to put your faith in him, the exclusivity of, that Jesus is the only way to be right with God. This, religious, this belief that there is only one way to God and it's through Jesus, and that you need to live a life of thankfulness to Jesus Christ. That doesn't matter. I could just say, yeah, he's there, and I'm pretty sure I'm okay with him. If you're just living a life of sin, embracing the brokenness, embracing your own kingdom, building your own kingdom. If Jesus is just a mascot for a larger cause or another identity, you need to hear that warning. And it's a warning that doesn't just come to those outside the church, outside of the people of God. Saul's not a Philistine. Saul's not someone who comes from outside of Israel. He is part of Israel. This is the response of God's people to God's will. This is the response of the church to God. The warning comes not just to those outside of Israel. Hey, look out if you don't embrace Israel's God. No, it comes to Israel. Israel, this is your God, and this is what He's doing, and this is who He is, how He works, His Messiah. And they'll submit to Him. We see this so much, the church opposing God. We see it in the history of Israel. Much of Israel's history will be caught up in Israel rejecting or resisting God, knowing His will and choosing differently. You'll see it in the response to Jesus when He arrives. Think that through. The Jewish religious leaders, it's likely they knew exactly who Jesus was. I mean, Jesus was raising people from the dead. He was doing stuff that you could not do if you were not from God. Think that through. They knew exactly who Jesus was, and they hated Him. We will lose our place and station. We have a good thing going here, and Jesus needs to die. We have it, the kingdom in our hearts. The things that we hold so highly in our lives. That if Jesus is a threat to them, well, all the worse for Jesus. If Jesus were to appear here right now in all His glory, would your response be one of faith and love and giving yourself to Him? Or would your cause be too big? Your expectations, your cultural expectations, your ideas of what a church is supposed to look like, your ideas about what's right and wrong, your morality, your political views, all that stuff. If He shows up and He's not supportive of those, how would you respond? Would He be your enemy? For those who don't love God, who God by His grace doesn't pull to Himself, Jesus Christ will be their enemy. They will rage against the light. They will fight. So the call comes to you to be encountered by the Messiah, by Jesus Christ, to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, that He is God's Son, the one who saves you from yourself, saves you from your sin, and gives you new life. And it's only by the grace of God that our response will be different than Saul's. And what we also see is how the world will respond to Christ, to God's Messiah, and to His kingdom. What Saul does is what the world does: eliminate, marginalize, isolate. And the point here is not to give you some roadmap, some strategy for how to respond to that. No. The point is to tell you it's going to happen. I think one of the challenges we have in the West is that we are surprised. They're not affirming our faith. They're not agreeing with us. We're losing opportunities. We're not being able to do the stuff that we thought we were supposed to be able to do because they should be all happy and excited about us, and they're not. Are you surprised? Your experience, our experience here in the West, is such a minuscule fraction of the experience of the church of all times and places. Do you understand that? Like, most Christians for all of history and all over the world have not experienced acceptance. Don't be surprised. Don't look for it, don't long for it, but don't be surprised. Jesus says, Matthew 10:22, you will be hated for my name's sake. John 15:18, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. Our hope is not in coming up with ways to prevent our marginalization, fight for ways to remain vital and important in our culture, or having our hope found in the world accepting us and liking us. Doesn't mean that we have to not be engaged with our world, not be vital and relevant to the world, not be confrontational with the world. That's not saying that. But the point is, our hope is not in those things. Our hope is not in being a Messiah, being received as a Messiah. Our hope is in what Jesus, the Messiah, has done. And as we walk through this world, our hope is that we follow Jesus, and that in following Jesus, we are the hope of the world. The only way for us to be relevant and vital to this world is for us to be church, to be God's people, to follow Jesus. And our hope is in the way the story ends, the inevitability of the victory of God. Saul, all his actions were futile. He tries to resist, but everything he does simply confirms that David is God's choice. Confirms it to Saul. He sees, verse 12, verse 14, verse 28, the Lord is with him. He's not with Saul. The people love him. He has success. It's the inevitability of the Messiah, of God's plan of redemption. And we see that with Jesus. The world did everything it could do to stop Jesus. The Romans executed a man who said he was a king, a threat to the empire. The Jewish leaders killed a threat to their place and station. But as the Apostle Peter says, Acts 2:22-24, you meant to do this, but God used it to bring redemption. Nothing will prevent God from achieving his goal. The book of Revelation, you read the book of Revelation, that's the point of the book of Revelation. It looks bad, you're suffering, you're going through all kinds of stuff, but the victory is assured. Nothing will stand in the way of Jesus Christ. God will accomplish his goal. Doesn't mean there won't be suffering and pain, but God uses it all to accomplish his goal. So that's our response to God, is hope in him. It's the opposite of Saul's response. Saul is the anti-Messiah. He spirals downward into his own personal story. He spirals down into rejection of God and raging against the advancing kingdom of God. And he shows us how not to interact with sin when it comes into our lives. So hear the gospel of the kingdom in the response of Saul. The gospel of the response not to make. And may God use this to move you to see him more